Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you for watching. In this video I'd like to spend some time talking about the life of the Buddha and get to some of the key teachings from the Buddha. Now I should note that the Buddha wasn't born as the Buddha. The term Buddha just means one who is awake. And so Buddha, the one who became the Buddha, his name is Siddhartha Gautama. And Siddhartha Gautama was born in the 6th century. Most scholars say he was born in 563, and he ended up dying in 483 BCE. So he lived in the 6th century and well into the 5th century before the current era. Now, Siddhartha was born to King Shuddhodana, and who was the king of the group of Hindus in India named the Shakyas, and his mother's name was Maya. And there are lots of perhaps legends, depending on your views on these matters, about the birth of the Buddha. We get the virgin birth story in certain stories of the birth of Siddhartha, who was to become the Buddha. So we have your passages that go something like this. There lived once upon a time the king of the Shakyas, a Skyan of the solar race, whose name was Shuddhodana. He had a wife who was called the Great Maya. These two tasted of love's delights, and one day she conceived the fruit of her womb, but without any defilement, suggesting that she conceived of Siddhartha without any sexual intercourse. Just before her conception, the passage continues, she had a dream. A white elephant seemed to enter her body, but without causing her any pain. So this is a kind of story, a virgin birth story, that's associated with the birth of Siddhartha, something that we see in other religious traditions. Say, for example, in Christianity, there's the virgin birth of the key figure there, namely Jesus of Nazareth. We also find stories about how there were certain wise. There was a certain wise man who visited the palace that Shuddhodana and Maya lived in after the birth of the Buddha, or after the birth of Siddhartha, who would become the Buddha, more accurately. And the story goes something like this: Then Asita, the great seer, the wise man, came to the palace. He knew of the birth of the Buddha, of Siddhartha, for in his trance he had perceived the miraculous signs which had attended it. With tears flickering on his eyelashes, the seer explained his agitation to the king in these words: "It is not for him that I am perturbed, but I am disappointed for myself. For the time has come when I must pass away, just when he is born, who shall discover the extinction of birth, which is so hard to win. Uninterested in worldly affairs, he will give up his kingdom." So this is a prophecy about the life of Siddhartha, who is to become the Buddha. "By strenuous efforts, he will win what is truly will to those who are tormented with pains and hemmed in by the worldly concerns, who are lost in the desert tracks of samsara." Remember the round of death and rebirth, which many of us are plagued by in our lives. "He shall proclaim the path which leads to salvation as to travelers who have lost their way. Creatures are scorched by the fire of greed, and he will refresh them with the rain of the Dharma." And Dharma is a concept that we get from Hinduism and Buddhism, which means truth, or the duty that you have to live up to that corresponds with the truth, the truth of oughtness, you could say, which is copious like the rain from a mighty cloud when the summer's burning heat is over. So there's a great prophecy here about Siddhartha, about the child of Shuddhodana and Maya, about how this man is going to be someone who helps people, all peoples perhaps, to overcome samsara, at least giving people the answers to the questions involving how to overcome samsara, the constant cycle of death and rebirth, and to finally be liberated from that once and for all. So that's a great prophecy, the life of Siddhartha, that would culminate in the teachings of the Buddha that we get from early on in the life of Siddhartha. Now, given the teachings of the prophet, the legend has it that Shuddhodana decided to try to shield Siddhartha from the external world, because he wanted his his son to be someone who would follow in his footsteps and be a great king, as opposed to being someone who would give up the kingdom that was referred to and prophesied about in from the wise man who visited Sita. And so his father is trying to, in some sense, counter the prophecy, trying to make it not come true, so that way his son follows in his footsteps. So he shields him, and it basically tries to keep him in the palace as long as he possibly can, giving him pleasures of the world to consume him. And over time, Siddhartha, he finds himself unhappy with just experiencing the pleasures that are given to him. He has women, he has food, he has music, he has whatever he wants at his disposal to distract him from anything that could lead to his religious mission, as it were. And he ends up having a child with a woman named Yasodhara, and the child's name is Rahula. And Rahula, significantly perhaps, means trapped. And so the name of the child may actually be significant for what was going on in the life of Buddha, or of Siddhartha, soon to be the Buddha at this time. Namely, he's feeling trapped by the world of pleasure that he is living in. But eventually he finds his way out of the palace. As you can imagine, things can only go on for so long. And so the father, Shuddhodana, he ends up arranging for Siddhartha's leaving the palace, but he kind of tries to arrange things perfectly so that way Siddhartha doesn't see any of the suffering in the world, because if he sees the suffering, then the fear is that he will try to find a way of getting people, trying to find a way of alleviating that suffering, or at least finding the teachings, or finding the knowledge to develop the teachings to eliminate the sufferings of this world. But as fate would have it, or as the prophecy would have it earlier from Masita, the king wasn't able to stop all expressions of suffering, and there famously several different, four different sites that that Siddhartha sees on his ventures into the world outside of his palace, which, remember, was until this time period just filled with all kinds of worldly and pleasurely delights for Siddhartha. So here are the first three passing sites, some passages that we have on the life of Siddhartha. In the course of time, feeling like an elephant locked up inside a house, Siddhartha set his heart on making a journey outside the palace. The king heard of his plan and arranged a pleasure excursion. He gave orders that all common folk with any kind of affliction should be kept away from the royal road, because he frequently feared that they might agitate the prince's sensitive mind. Very gently, all cripples, all those with disabilities, more politically correctly put, were driven away, and all those who were crazy, aged, ailing, and the like, and also all the wretched beggars. So the royal highway was supremely significant. But as fate would have it, a bent, toothless, and haggard old man appears on the roadside. Stunned by the sight, Prince Siddhartha asks his charioteer to explain this oddity, and the charioteer explains, "Sweet princess is no other than an aged man." Okay, and so he explains to him this is someone who is aged, and Siddhartha says, "Will I age?" And yeah, of course you will age. You are just like the rest of us. You are going to age. And the prince responds by saying, "Wow, this is great suffering. I did not know about this." And after seeing someone who's aged, he sees someone who has a diseased body. So not just someone who's aged, but someone who actually has a diseased body. And he asks his charioteer again, "Well, what is this sight that I'm seeing?" And the charioteer explains to him, "This is disease." "Well, all people have disease. All people are going to have disease. Okay, even me, even you," says the charioteer. And then the last of the sights, for now, there's the big three, and then the third one, he sees a corpse. And he's like, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, you see, you have someone who ages, someone who's in disease, someone as a result of disease is going to die. Someone who ends up contracting a disease is ultimately going to die in many cases, and well, in all cases, the diseases, once the diseases where diseases are strong enough." And so the charioteer explains to him what becomes of us. We're all going to die. We're all going to become a corpse. And that means that's even going to apply to Siddhartha. So Siddhartha, he's really, really upset by this. This really bothers him, and he's trying to figure out, well, what can I do? He's very sensitive to the sights that these three passing sights that he's seen, and then he goes out and he's thinking that there's so much pity and suffering in the world, deeply troubled, and he sees someone who is a religious mendicant or a religious beggar, and Siddhartha asks this person, what are you? And he goes, well, I'm basically a hermit. I'm a monk. I practice religion, and I beg for my food. I'm homeless, and I live in such a way so as to try to overcome the suffering. So I'm trying to, in some sense, live in such a way that I quell my desires as much as I possibly can in order to overcome the suffering that comes with having such powerful desires for things. And at this site, Siddhartha says, okay, this is the site that is going to put me over the edge here, and I'm going to live in a different way. So he actually ends up sneaking out of his father's palace and ends up becoming a religious mendicant himself, and he takes up the religious life, which is a life of extreme asceticism. And supposedly Siddhartha was an awesome ascetic in the sense that he had great powers of self-discipline, and he would have long periods of fasting, would consume very little food and drink, and he did so for the sake of trying to liberate from samsara, from the realm of suffering that he sees in the world, that comes from being born, dying, and then having that just continue to repeat itself over and over again. So he's basically here following a Hindu path, the religious life for the Hindu. In many cases involved renouncing the world in extreme ways in order to overcome the desires that lead to the suffering that we have in our life. The suffering is going to come from the fact that we have strong desires for things, but we can't have those desires satisfied, so we live in constant states of frustration. Well, a common Hindu religious method for dealing with this was to eliminate the desires, and the way you eliminate the desires is through extreme asceticism. Okay, so he tries this for a long time, and he actually comes to realize that he is just suffering miserably. Okay, even though he's quite good at what he's doing, he says, I'm suffering in a powerful way that doesn't seem to be making my life better for me, and so he thinks there's got to be a better way, and so he breaks away from the harsh asceticism of the Hindu tradition, and he vows to try to find a better way. And he sits under, famously, what's called the Bodhi tree until he finds the answers, the better answers to the questions that are plaguing him about why it is that we're suffering and how it is that we can cope with this suffering. You got to keep in mind that it's not only that Siddhartha was suffering; he noticed suffering all around him. And here he's someone with a compassionate heart, a sensitive heart, and wants to find answers not only for himself, but wants to find answers for all. And he decides, I'm going to sit under this Bodhi tree. I'm going to meditate, basically, until I get the answers to the universe. I'm not going to take no for an answer. And I'm not going to be given to any kind of temptation to leave until I get the answers to the big questions that I'm seeking. And he ends up having a mystical experience, an experience where he comes in contact with that which would provide the answers to him. And these are deep, profound insights that he ends up learning, and they're captured in the Four Noble Truths. So I'll conclude just by stating the Four Noble Truths this time, and then I'll pick up with discussing them in the next video. So the Four Noble Truths involve the claim that all life is suffering. The second one is that a serious kind of craving, serious kind of desire is the cause of the fact that all life is suffering. The third is that the suffering here that's so prevalent can be eliminated in this life. So there's an optimistic response to the idea that all life is suffering, and that the way out is through what's known as the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is going to involve living rightly in a whole host of ways that will help us to eliminate suffering and overcome